Hello, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to our latest webinar, The Next 20 in Buildings. We're really pleased to have you join us. My name is Tom Barbieri. I am Dunsky's Director of Communications and Market Engagement. And I will just get things kicked off here with a little bit of housekeeping and a quick walkthrough of the agenda. So due to the great turnout today, we have disabled the chat, but we really encourage people to ask questions using the Q&A function at the bottom of their Zoom screen. You can ask questions throughout. We will be reviewing those during the course of the webinar, and towards the end of the webinar, we will ask our guests and our panelists to answer some of those questions. Please, we invite you to submit questions in English or French. And also, if anyone requires closed captioning, they can do so by turning on the closed captioning button. There's an option there at the bottom, show captions. So if we take a quick look at the agenda, I'll just walk people through before we get started. We'll start with some opening remarks from our president, Philippe Dunsky. Then we'll hand it over to my colleagues, William Harvey and Lauren McNutt, to talk a little bit about what we see in the next 20 years in buildings in this transition. Then we're really pleased to be having a discussion with two of our clients from Hydro-Quebec and Énergir, utilities based in Quebec. And then we'll wrap up with about a 10-minute Q&A, as I just mentioned. So without further delay, I'm happy to hand it over to Philippe Dunsky.
All right, thanks so much, Tommy, and thanks everyone for joining us for this second webinar in our series. I'll just take a few minutes to talk quickly about our firm, for those of you who don't know us, and then pass it over to the experts who will talk about how we're going to actually decarbonize heating systems across North America in the most efficient and effective and reliable way. So if you just skip over next slide. So for those of you who don't know us, and hopefully this slide will we'll get stuff up. All right, there we go. In a quick nutshell, look, we've been around for a couple of decades now, thus the 20th webinar series. We have an amazing team of about 65 now dedicated professionals. So these are full-time in-house people who do nothing but focus on helping our clients navigate the energy transition. This is our bread and butter and our passion and what we work on day and night. We've done that through over 1,000 projects now over that 20-year period for clients across North America. And at fundamental level, the what we do, you see up top, analysis and strategy. So anyone who knows our team knows that roughly speaking, half of our team are quant people, so people who do deep analytics. They're engineers, they're economists, they're crunching the numbers, doing the modeling, figuring out what is going to be, what could be, and what the costs and benefits are. And then the other half of our team are fundamentally strategists, figuring out how do we make it happen, figuring out the go-to-market strategies, the regulatory approaches, the policies needed to make this transition happen in the most affordable and reliable way possible. Our clients are, as you see, across North America. You see some of our clients, not all, but what you see broadly speaking is an awful lot of governments, an awful lot of utilities, and a growing number of large corporate and nonprofit clients as well. So we're very happy to work for all these fine folks who are, by and large, day in, day out, leading us through this transition, this historic transition that we are in the midst of, and that if we play our cards right, we will emerge from healthier and with stronger economies and with affordable energy systems. So that's quickly who we are. Now, you see up top, we work in the 4 areas of the energy transition: buildings, transportation, industry, and of course, the energy systems that supply it all. Just focus really quickly in on the buildings side of the equation. A lot of different things that we do. We develop the pathways. So conversation today is around pathways for clean heating systems across Canada and across the US. Our team assesses endless stream of technological solutions that help us get there. We help our clients forecast loads in this very, very quickly changing world. So loads that include, obviously, the advent of heat pumps coming into the market in a very big way, but also beyond the building side, electric vehicles and industrial electro technologies. And we try to get that, down to a very granular level. It's not just the high level, hey, we're going to have 2% per year growth or 3% per year growth. It's down to zip code, postal code level stuff so that we can actually plan our infrastructure investments down to the substation level, even feeder levels. We do a lot of work assessing the market potential for new technologies that that will help us decarbonize buildings and decarbonize heating more specifically. Once we understand what the potential looks like, we work with our clients to design their go-to-market strategies to make this all happen. And then ultimately, once that's done, we're going to evaluate how those strategies have been going and how they can be improved, because it's a continuous cycle. And a lot more. So I don't want to belabor it, but just want to give you a high level view of what this extraordinary team does day in, day out within the building sector in particular. So that said, let's just talk about buildings more broadly, not us, but the challenge that we have. And the challenge is, pretty much the same, irrespective of where we are in North America. It varies a little bit, but broadly speaking, pretty much anywhere you are, buildings are going to consume roughly a quarter of all of our energy and emit about a quarter of all of our emissions. Really is that simple, that straightforward. Again, in most places, there's some exceptions, some outliers. I happen to live in one outlier, but broadly speaking, that's the picture. So this is a really critical piece of the puzzle, of the challenge, assuming that we're looking at this challenge as one of not wanting to waste energy. So we know that energy is an important commodity and a critical commodity for our livelihoods. We don't want to waste it. We need energy security. And so using it as efficiently as possible is critical to that security. And then we also don't want to, we will want to cut emissions. And so again, moving toward clean heating systems, in particular in the building sector, is critical to that. And we know how critical it is. Over 90% of buildings' operating emissions come from space and water heating. So I'm not going to belabor this more, and I'm not going to use up too much of your time more before I hand it over to the experts. We're going to do two things here. We're going to talk first of all about the fundamental question: how do we optimize the transition to clean heat? And when we talk about how to optimize it, you'll see we don't take the blunt approach. We don't take the kind of easy fix approach. These are simple questions to ask, but very, very complex issues to tackle, and ones that require a hell of a lot of nuance, more than blunt instruments. So our team leans into the nuance. Nuance these days is a word that sometimes appears in short supply, but we still care about it a lot. And so our team is going to walk through a bit the approach that we take to this and our views of how we can navigate and how we can actually achieve this transition successfully. And then second of all, we're gonna invite a couple of guests to talk about one case study being Quebec and its very innovative way that it has adopted to clean heating in that province. So we will have guests from Hydro-Québec and from the primary gas utility Énergir talk about their very innovative and collaborative, I'll say, approach to achieving this goal. With that, let me pass it over to my colleagues, Lauren and William, and they'll walk you through some of our thinking around this topic. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Philip. So first, let's look at what the strategic principles of clean heat planning are. So when we talk about clean heat planning, we often hear about very simple choices. Electrify everything, go all in on energy efficiency, or just decarbonize the gas supply. But when we look deeper in each of when we look deeper, each of these approaches raise additional questions and complexities. For instance, electrify everything can sound like the obvious solution, but in places like Quebec, where a significant portion of the building stock is already electrified and the grid is winter peaking, peak demand has become a major challenge, and each megawatt needs to be allocated strategically. So in jurisdictions planning for electrification, we need to anticipate this challenge and identify the right mix of technologies that can help manage peak demand to minimize the strain on the grid. Then energy efficiency makes a lot of sense on paper. But the question is, how fast can we do it? Most of the building stock's energy uses from existing buildings, and deep retrofits and building upgrades take time. They face labor shortages and high upfront costs. So we have to ask ourselves, will this approach slow down the pace we need to reach our goals? Then decarbonizing the gas system is an easy solution for the end customer, but the supply is either limited, high cost, or both. Plus, the industrial sector will also compete for this fuel. So we need a strategy for allocation to minimize upwards pressure on rates. Speaking of which, let's not forget that a fundamental question that must be addressed here is which path keeps energy bills the lowest. Each approach here has cost implications. And this is why nuance matters. The best clean heat plan must leverage the trade-offs between those elements, and to do so must rely on a robust, comprehensive, and granular assessment. And we've done this assessment throughout North America, from coast to coast in Canada and in many states in the US. And for those projects, we have developed and refined a modeling tool called HEAT that forecasts potential market adoption of clean heat solution under an array of scenarios and technical, economic, and market constraints. So what should the modeling for clean heat planning look like? First, it must be comprehensive and granular. Some of our recent projects have included anywhere between 5,000 and 10,000 unique combination of building archetypes, vintages, technologies, systems, and fuels. It must also account for real-world dynamics. Heat pump adoption, for instance, is not only driven by heating consideration, but also by cooling consideration, which increases the opportunities for clean heat adoptions. The modeling must also be precise, especially when we talk about heat pump, mainly because their performance varies dynamically with outdoor temperatures. And so we need to properly assess the impact on peak demand, whether systems are fully electric, hybrid, or with DR. And properly accounting for peak will show heat pumps may increase winter peak, but also that they are very efficient ACs and thus can also reduce summer peak. So why do we need this approach? It is because we want to see how viable options for clean heating at the building level align with energy systems constraints. For instance, when we look at the electricity system, costs increase with peak demand. When we look at decarbonized gas, the costs rise as volume grow. So this creates trade-offs that when we're designing clean heat solutions, and we must understand them. Let's consider 3 pathways to decarbonizing a gas-heated building. A first approach would be to electrify efficiently using a heat pump and reducing peak using RNG. This approach minimizes the strain on the grid and lowers the gas volume required. But the question is here, what will happen to the customer bill? Is it cost effective for them? Another approach would be to electrify completely while displacing peak using DR. So this approach is likely to avoid the need for gas. But the question that arises is there enough DR potential to electrify everyone this way? And if the answer is no, then how do we allocate this potential to bring the most value in the system? A third approach would be to electrify while reducing peak using ground source heat pumps, which will also likely avoid the need for gas. But the question is, does this approach minimize system costs? And some insight we got from on this subject is that in cold climate jurisdictions, when the grid is already winter peaking, in new construction, when we compare the additional costs of ground source heat pump, they are likely offset by the avoided costs from having no gas connection, which make it a very interesting approach to decarbonize new constructions. One thing I haven't talked about here yet is energy efficiency. So we can ask ourselves that if energy sources are now entirely clean, does reducing consumption still matter? And yes, it remains essential because this would also help lower system costs by both managing peak loads and optimizing resources like decarbonized gas. So the technology approach and efficiency are not opposing strategies. They really go hand in hand here. A last point on this slide would be that since the energy system constraints vary by location, this means a clean heat strategy must be tailored to the local realities to be optimal. Then another thing the modeling has to do is account for all perspectives. And the reason is we'll eventually want to bridge the gap between them. And so why are there different perspectives? It's because different actors have different goals. For instance, when we look from a societal perspective, what we likely want to do is reduce greenhouse gas emissions. When we look at the system perspective, we want to avoid system costs and ensure reliability. Then from the participants' point of view, what's important is equipment costs and lowering the cost of energy bills. So modeling the different perspectives will help understand, for instance, what is the most cost-effective approach from a societal perspective. This will give you a picture of what the future should look like if we want to strive for optimal clean heat strategies. It'll show the allocation between different technologies and the pace we need to get there. The different perspectives will also show how different approaches will affect the energy system. We're in a system today where, in many cases, it is carbon intensive, but it is reliable and affordable. If we go for kind of silver bullet solutions, all electric or all clean fuels, we will decarbonize, but the question is at what cost? If we leverage the trade-offs between the different systems to opt for an optimized approach, we will also optimize the outcomes, ensuring affordable, reliable, and clean energy systems. Then lastly, we need to understand where customers are likely to go, because people will choose what benefits them and not necessarily what's best for the system or society. And this perspective will likely show a different adoption outcome and a much slower pace. And so understanding how to bridge that gap between the societal perspective and the participants' perspective is what brings us from where we are today to where we want to be tomorrow.
I think this is where I jump in. I think, William, you bring up such a good point, and it's so important to be able to model and understand and demonstrate the potential impacts to the energy system, what's needed to get to our net zero goals, and then ultimately what are participants actually going to do. And I think we very clearly have shown, what's needed versus what people do can be very different. And I always like to say, buildings don't make decisions, people do. So we really need to understand not only what the modeling tells us and what that optimal least cost pathway is to decarbonize, but then understanding what strategies we can implement to guide our path to decarbonization. So I want to kind of come back again to this, this concept of what participants actually do is nowhere near what we need in order to get to our net zero goals by 2050. And just to put this into perspective, in Canada, we have over 16.5 million existing buildings across Canada. Most, I believe 16 million of those are residential buildings. The rest are commercial, industrial, institutional. 70% of those buildings that are standing today are still going to be standing in 2050. We have a current retrofit rate of less than 1% annually. in order to reach our goals by 2050, we need to increase that to about 3% annually. And that equates to approximately 335,000 buildings over and above what we're retrofitting today on an annual basis to get to our net zero goals. And then on the new construction side, by 2050, 30% of those buildings are going to be newer. And we have this incredible opportunity right now to be building better from the start and to address the dual challenge of not only the climate challenge, but also housing affordability, which I know is top of mind for many. But in order to restore affordability, it's estimated in Canada that approximately 500,000 additional units are needed per year. And that equates to almost a doubling of the current construction rate that we're seeing today. So we're certainly falling far short from what we need in order to achieve our goals. And I think the big question is why, and what do we need to change in order to get to where we need to be and increase the scale and pace that's required. So at Densky, sort of internally, I've sort of described our current situation as being one of help and hope. We are seeing this slow incremental change that's largely driven by voluntary programs that target early adopters, followed then by regulation. And what we need is really a paradigm shift. We need to move from this help and hope situation to an approach that first and foremost mandates and support. So accelerating transformational change by requiring everyone to do more, but at the same time helping everyone comply with those requirements. So I'm going to kind of break this down in a little bit more detail. So just kind of our traditional approach has been to encourage early adopters to go beyond the minimum standards using traditional DSM programs like education, incentives, rebates, and support. We try to scale that up with additional enabling strategies like energy coaching, financing, workforce development, and training. And only when we feel the market is ready do we then incrementally ratchet up the minimum standards through building codes and equipment standards. And these efforts have been traditionally siloed, focused on electricity or gas. Sometimes we do it jointly, but we tend to kind of separate those. And this results in that incremental change. And even in a regulated utility environment, attribution is often the focus, only trying to make sure that funding goes to people who would not otherwise participate or do take action. Those that would have taken action anyways, assistance is sort of deemed wasted. Those are free riders, as we know. And energy efficiency programs are delivered equally, meaning technically they're available to everyone, but we know that it's not equitable. Not everyone has access to be able to access services and programs. And they have different unique needs and circumstances that require tailored approaches. So I certainly don't want to discount the collective effort that we've made. We have made significant progress. Our buildings are better, but we know that it's not enough, and we know that we can do better. So in this paradigm shift, as we move forward over the next 20 years, we, of course, still have our net zero goal by 2050. Through proper modeling, as William just demonstrated, we can understand the impacts to the energy system, the potential cost impacts to customers, and then what are those least cost optimal pathways to get there. And then we sort of flip the switch. We really focus on regulation, mandating, sending that clear signal in advance, and requiring people to do more. I certainly recognize that utilities and government often struggle to dictate changes to the market in a way that's acceptable, certainly at an accelerated pace. So what this requires is additional support and assistance for everyone to comply. And that makes that regulatory intervention possible and to accelerate the transition. So I want to demonstrate where this is happening in some jurisdictions already, and we're starting to see this shift in approach. There's a number of several leading jurisdictions across North America, British Columbia, Quebec, and Canada being two, and then several in the United States that are really undertaking clean heat planning. Each jurisdiction has tailored their approach to their specific region, but there are common elements that we're seeing across the board. They're taking comprehensive, holistic approaches that involve clean heat policies, clean heat plans, clean heat acts, clean fuel standards, and they're combining that with complementary policies like building codes that are much more advanced, going beyond just energy to also include carbon, and building performance standards, among others. They set very clear targets and timelines focused on reducing greenhouse gas emissions from heating. And there's also utilities and other fuel suppliers specific obligations to reduce emissions or invest in clean heat alternatives. And we're also seeing efforts to adapt or amend existing policies that hinder or are contradicting our emission reduction efforts. So things like limiting gas line extension allowances, removing the gas utilities obligation to serve. And then we're seeing compliance and enforcement mechanisms like credits and penalties to try and encourage progress. These jurisdictions are promoting heating decarbonization and electrification using incentives, tax credits, innovative rate design for specific technologies like heat pumps, dual fuel systems, and DR measures. And then there's support for alternative clean heat like renewable natural gas where electrification is not possible, or to accommodate increased demand on the grid to maintain cost and reliability, as William mentioned earlier. And then lastly, there's a very concerted effort to ensure that these programs, services, and support are delivered equitably and affordably, providing varying levels of service and support to address the unique needs of customers. And this can be in the form of additional increased funding or non-financial support for priority and vulnerable populations. I could go into detail. We don't have a lot of time, but I think if I could sum this up in sort of 3 key pillars of successful clean heat planning, this is really going to require thoughtful planning, regulation, and implementation. We need, as William spoke about, measured, balanced approach to implementing clean heat planning that is ensuring that we can enable gas and electricity infrastructure to adapt, considering the impacts to customers, maintaining reliability and affordability. We also need to make sure that we have consistent goals and mandates, that we're aligning our performance targets, our building and utility regulations with those climate goals to enable, not hinder, our progress. And then lastly, we absolutely have to take a multi-stakeholder collaborative approach. This will not fall on any one entity. We need support and efforts at all levels of government, from local government, state, provincial, and federal governments, utilities, regulators, program administrators, and industry to make this happen and help and enable everyone to adjust to the transition and benefit from it. With that, I am going to, first and foremost, I wanted to talk a little bit about or introduce our guest speakers from Hydro-Québec and Énergir. Dunsky has had the privilege to work with these 2 organizations for many years, and we've been able to help support the changes that have happened over and been accelerated over just the last several years. And I think they really are a model for clean heat collaboration. We really wanted to share that with a broader audience today. Before I introduce our guests, I do want to give you a bit of context for those who are on the call who may not be familiar with the local context in Quebec. Quebec is the 2nd largest province by population size in Canada. Hydro-Québec serves almost 4.5 million customers across the province. 99% of electricity is hydro. 80% of residential customers have electrical resistance heating. They are a winter peaking utility, and they hit a historic peak in February 2023, and are planning for significant growth on the electricity system, almost double where we are today by 2050. Énergir is the largest natural gas distributor in Quebec. They serve 200,000 customers, distribute over 95% of natural gas in the province. Almost 40% of their volume are for the building sector, and 60% of the commercial and industrial sector is heated with natural gas. By 2040, they're planning to reduce their volumes dramatically, close to 50% in the commercial and industrial sector and 75% in the residential sector. And the remaining gas on the system will be 100% renewable natural gas. So I want to welcome our two guest speakers, JP Croteau, Director of Residential Programs at Hydro-Québec, and Jerry Joseph, Executive Director of Customer Experience at Énergir. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you,
Lauren.
So I'll start with a couple of guided questions, and then I know we're going to open it up to the broader audience to ask a few. So JP, I'm going to start with you. The electricity supplied to your customers is already decarbonized, almost 100%. A question that many may ask is, why are you involved in heating decarbonization? And can you describe your main strengths and programs that focus on clean heat?
Sure, Lauren. Thank you for the questions, and thank you for the intro and presenting a bit of the situation here in Quebec and how Hydro-Québec is set up. So, one thing we have to keep in mind is that the electrical generation is decarbonized, but our economy isn't. Now, we understand that to reach net zero, we're going to need to decarbonize industrial processes, transportation, as well as space heating, even though most of the space heating is already electrical. Now, electrification of the remaining space heating and of the industrial processes and the transportation is going to be key to reaching decarbonization, but it needs to be implemented at a pace that allows for capacity, transportation, and distribution expansion. Now, as you've mentioned a bit earlier, our demand is currently winter peaking. About 50% of our peak demand is due specifically to space heating. As you've also mentioned, it's mostly resistive systems, which is kind of unique in terms of what we're seeing around the world. I mean, who's crazy enough to be using resistive heating to heat up buildings? Well, we are. Could almost say it's an historical thing. It's always been kind of that way when we went through decarbonization of most of the heating systems here in Quebec. But decarbonizing everything that's left. So suppose that today, every single building that's using a carbonized solution to heat was to switch to electrical energy and would do it in the same framework as the existing technology that we have today. Same resistive heating with a bit of heat pump. We're talking about adding 25% to the load peak of what we have today. So we have to ask ourselves whether meeting 100% of space heating needs with this same technology today is the right type of use for the future capacity expansion that we need. The space heating, you have to bear in mind that it's characterized by a very low load factor with a maximum energy demand, obviously, during the winter. And as such, direct electrification of space heating could slow down decarbonization efforts of other sectors by locking up all of that expansion capacity for years to come. So capacity that could otherwise be used for transportation, which is one of the key decarbonization paths today, or industrial processes, and both have much higher load factor. So if you put all of this together, what we came to a conclusion, obviously, is there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution. So especially when we're talking about decarbonizing existing housing, it's more of a surgical approach. It's not going to be a solution where you can simply update the code and that's it. It's going to happen naturally. You have to work with what's already existing. So if it's not a one size fits all, then that means you're going to have a portfolio of different solutions that you want to bring to the table with your customers. But at the end of the day, when we talk with our customers and they want to go through a path of decarbonization, we always start basically in the same way. And it should be surprising to most people on the call is step one is start by reducing your actual energy consumption. What can you do to simply reduce what you're doing today? Then second, if you know that your choice is going to be electrification, then you have to go towards energy efficient solutions. Talking about heat pumps. Now, has a bit of a challenge on heat pumps because heat pumps, when you get to very low temperature, coefficient of performance drops, and then suddenly you end up with the same type of peaks. But technology has evolved a lot in the last few years, and we're talking more and more about high efficiency cold climate heat pumps. And the third thing is once you've picked your energy efficient solution, you have to add controls to help you move that consumption around in time. So basically, decarbonization needs to work hand in hand with consuming less and at the right time, energy efficiency and demand response. So when we take all of that, when we look at the demand side solutions, demand side management solutions, sorry, that we have for the residential sector, some examples that we have. So today we have our program called Logivert, which is designed for residential customers. And the key feature of Logivert is the heat pumps. It's the lead product that we have. It's the biggest change that we have. We've done close to 90,000 heat pumps in 2024 with our customers. As mentioned before, cold climate, high efficiency products that we're looking for. Now, in terms of demand response, we look at different rates and options. So we have one rate and one optional rate, critical peak pricing, winter credit. We also have DR programs through our subsidiary ELO, so specializing in connected device, Internet of Things. But I have to be very blunt here, and we have to give ourselves a bit of tough love right now. Is we're highly dependent on the customer behavior. We're dependent on the customer behavior on the first level of them actually taking action. And that's why I love the slide that you had a bit before between the paradigm shift between hoping. It's like it's really tough to try to reach target and be dependent on simply hoping. But then once the customer actually has decided, has shown interest and is stepping in, sometimes they don't really know how to do it well. So some numbers that I have to show you how it can be difficult is when we look at our surveys, we know that about 30% of our customers today already have heat pumps. And then we ask the question to our customers, what's the main source of your space heating? It's 20% of our customers mentioned they have a heat pump. So basically you're saying there's a heat pump that's only used for air conditioning during the hot months, which in Quebec is what, like 2.5 months if you're lucky? So you have a nice piece of equipment that's not going to be used to its full extent. On the other side, in terms of DR management, at every given DR event that we have close to 70% of people who have signed up to a DR rate that actually don't really move their consumption around, either because they can't at that point. Sometimes it happens. You sign up, the event is not matching, or sometimes you actually took action, but you didn't take the right actions. Now, when we look at connected devices, like the subsidiary for ELO, that 70% of customers drops to less than 5%. So it's a key takeaway here that if you actually have a technology at your customer site that is automated, can't actually make any mistakes, then obviously the performance is gonna grow. So you can think about connected devices like ELO. You can think about thermal storage that we have today that's already programmed, is already going to be absent the peak every single day. It's not on call, it just happens all the time. And dual fuel is one of those solutions. It allows us to remove from the few hundred hours of the peak consumption of our winter, all of the consumption that would be tied to heating. So those are my points of why are we looking at space heating, even though we're decarbonized in terms of generation.
Great. Thank you, JP. Jerry, question for you. Énergir is one of North America's leading gas utilities in terms of clean heat planning. Can you tell us what role you see gas utilities playing in this clean energy transition and describe the pillars of your own strategy?
Well, I do see that natural gas distributors like Énergir has a critical place to play in decarbonization of the building sector. Of course, Quebec is a unique example. I think we're because of the historic growth of the hydroelectric sector, we have a little bit of advance of other compared to other jurisdictions where we're really focused on the end use instead of the production of energy. Um, and with the government's will to really reduce RNG, GHG emissions, we feel compelled that we have to play a part into that transition. And really, what we're trying to do at Énergir is try to strike a balance between, minimizing costs, maximizing decarbonization, but also finding a way to keep our energy system resilient. And we find that keeping that balance or trying to navigate through the clean energy transition is going to need that balance. So our strategy is really built on using the right energy at the right place at the right time and really at the best cost. And I really feel like the gas network will be able to play a role into the energy transition, but beyond that as well, with using gas energy, our energy through a gas form in a decarbonized economy. And really, the way we're trying to do this is through four of our pillars. And GP really mentioned the first pillar is energy efficiency. So energy has been, has had energy efficiency program since 2001. We've been one of the first utilities to go in that path, and through 2001 to 2020, we were able to reduce our emissions of 1 million tons of GHG in those 20 years. And really, what we're trying to do in this decade is trying to double up on um, that result and really trying to avoid another million of tons of GHG by 2030. And that's one of the ways we're going to be able to meet, really the critical way in which we're going to be able to meet our goals of decarbonization. The second pillar is really to try and develop a strong synergy between the gas and the electric network. We do have the dual energy initiative we have with our colleagues here for Hydro-Quebec. We have a residential offering that's been in place since June 2022. We also have a commercial institutional offering that's been in place since November of 2023. And we're really seeing through that offering that our clients are really locking into decarbonization and also finding this balance between having rates that lowers their energy costs, having also reduction of GHG of about 70% because they use the electricity or heat pumps during the off-peak hours, and really opening up the path towards having a resilient house with having the access to natural gas to compensate in case of failures of if the electric networks. We're also looking at specific, bigger clients, industrial clients, and we work with our partners to try and see if there's specific paths for those clients in order to use both systems in order to decarbonate themselves. The third really pillar of our strategy is RNG. So we've been injecting RNG into our network since 2017, and of course distributing that RNG. Our goal is really to accelerate the injection of RNG by 2030 to have 10% of our energy that is RNG by then. And that really also helps to valorize the methane emissions that we have from organics that are basically filling up our landfills, and that really helps to reduce our GHG through that method. One of the most notable things we've done in the last year is started asking our clients to use RNG for any new connections since April 1st, 2024. So any new connections that is done in the building sector on our network has to use 100% RNG. And of course, we're able to keep a competitive way of heating their buildings with the dual energy offering that we have that makes it competitive compared to other renewable alternatives. And the last pillar is really trying to diversify our business into new sustainable vectors, growth vectors. So we're looking at, of course, district energy networks. We're looking at energy storage, geothermal, green hydrogen. These are all places where we're constantly investing in seeing how we can generate growth through those vectors and really being on a part of not only the clean energy transition, but really beyond that. And what we've seen is that with the help of Dunsky, we've been able to, work with you guys and make us and help us establish those trajectory and support our vision. And really, with your expertise, we were able to quantify the positive impacts of our vision to the Quebec's energy system, and really that's been able to really give a lot of credence to our strategy towards 2030.
Glad we could be a small part of the work that you both are doing. It's really wonderful. I'm going to steal one last question. I am conscious of time. I would definitely want to make sure that we give enough time to the audience to ask at least a few Q&As. I already see a few popping up. So this is for both of you. Énergir and Hydro-Québec have developed a joint program to help decarbonize gas heated buildings through dual fuel systems. You both just spoke about that. One of the interesting things about this collaboration, for those of us on the webinar today may not know, is that this was not directed by government or regulation. It really came from you, two organizations coming together. Can you tell us a bit more on why and how you were able to bridge those silos, the benefits of integrated clean heat planning, and some of the lessons learned? Maybe Jerry, we'll go in reverse. I'll start with you and then over to JP.
Well, there's always been a strong will by our governments to reduce GHG emissions. One of the things that we collectively realized that would bring massive challenges to our energy system. And once the government really recognized those challenges, it kind of we were able to Énergir and Hydro-Québec come together and really do a joint analysis to see how we could address those goals that were set by the government. And that's really how when we're looking at both of our respective clientele, of the impacts of decarbonation, and I'll just open up a little aspect of context, because we don't only have 200,000 clients more or less at Énergir, but we still represent 40% of the peak that Hydro-Québec distributes. So it does put in perspective the challenge that would still come from decarbonization of our clientele. And once we were able to sit down and really make those joint analysis, it really came to fruition that we had to work together in order to put in order to decarbonize our clientele. And that's really how we were able to push the government to listen to it and work towards a partnership with the government to have a program that would help our clientele go from 100% fossil natural gas to dual energy offering.
JP.
I don't know if you want to add, JP.
Yeah.
Yeah, what I would add is more on the on once it's put in place, once the whole thing was worked out between Énergir and Hydro-Québec. And just to point out, once we actually have to work through it, actually live it, some two key points to keep in mind. So we have both different organizations, and our systems need to go and interface with one another in a way that they were not designed to do. And it creates a challenging path sometimes for our customers, our joint customers, to suddenly have to start a process with our partner Énergir and go through some of the hoops that they have to jump through. And then the customer ends up on our side and they jump through a bit more hoops, way too many than what I like, but it is the nature of our businesses. So we need to get this to move easily, but it's not yet to the level that we'd like. So it's key to have a lot of communication between the two organizations, and communication at every single level. If you look at the sales, even on the sales side, we'll have joint calls to some customers. Then on operations, to make sure that as things are moving along, that there are paths for both sides to be able to talk to one another. Not always to the level that we like, but I mean, it's things that we're working on. And then on the management side as well, because if there's no clear guidelines given from the top as to where we want to go together in this partnership, then it's going to be a very difficult solution to bring out. And the point I would add after that is to just be humble. I mean, you have to know that the original agreement and everything that you've thought in your processes when you started it up is not going to be able to cover everything that's happening out in the field. Customers and partners can be quite creative. So you have to understand that you're going to have missed items. They have to give each other a bit of wiggle room to be able to put this into effect correctly.
I love that. You know, it's hard, but it's still worth it to go through this. You need all different levels of the organizations on both sides to be working together, and then having the ability and recognition that don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. Continue going, adapt, evolve as you move forward. So really wonderful. With that, I'm going to hand it over to William, who has been monitoring the chat, the Q&A. And I think we have several questions. We probably are not going to get to every question, unfortunately, today, but I think we can at least get to maybe one, maybe two or three.
Thank you, Lauren. I'm seeing 2 or 3 recurring question themes, so I'll try to at least ask these ones. So the first would be for Énergir in terms of the source and amount of RNG needed to decarbonize buildings and industrial sectors. So what do you see the sources be, and do you think there will be enough volume to reach the 100% goal by 2040?
So the goal is not to replace the usage that we currently have of natural gas by RNG. This is not something we can do. It's not possible. So we have to work towards energy efficiency. We have to work towards using the dual energy initiative to reduce the volumes that we distribute in the building sector. And whatever is reduced, whatever consumption, whatever volumes are left, I think that we are confident that we can replace that portion. And of course, we are looking at reducing more than 80 to 75 to 80% of the consumption in the residential sector, up to 50% in the commercial. And that's really the way we're looking at replacing the usage of natural gas by renewable natural gas by 2040. But yes.
Thank you. And maybe this one for JP. I've seen a lot of question about the hope and help to mandate and support. What do you think is, do you think building performance standards or, what other regulations would be needed to get, that paradigm shift that we need?
That's quite a loaded question. So obviously we have discussions with the government. We want to make sure that building codes have additional requirements in terms of energy efficiency. We'd like for everyone to have DR capable, DR able. Wow, that didn't come out right. DR capacity devices in the house around the key usage. So space heating, water heating, and then the third one that's coming up that's going to be charging your EVs. Obviously, we'd like for all of that to fall under new building codes. Now, what you have to keep in mind, and I think Lauren's presentation did a good cover of that, is you're only going to be addressing the new buildings as you do that. So how do you address the existing buildings? Is there a path to a different types of renovation code? Name it the way you want. But I always have a hard time when it's always going to be a question of codes. How do we engage the population to actually step up within the overall energy transition is more of the discussion that I like to have. What's going to be the key item that's going to trigger a reaction? I had a discussion just last week with some people from our marketing team, and I asked them the question that any marketer probably hates having is, how do we go viral with this? And so if it was easy, somebody would have figured it out and we'd be using it now. But at the end of the day, it's what's going to be able to allow us to flip from the hope model to this new paradigm where it just becomes it just becomes a simple culture that you don't waste energy, that you always install the best equipment that you can have, and it's going to be a tough sell. So I don't have the perfect answer for that. I wish I did. If you have one, just send it out to us. We'll take it.
I agree with you, JP. I'll add, I think from my perspective, it is a combination of things, just as you say. There has to be that regulation, sort of mandating what we want, the outcomes that we want upfront, sending that clear market signal. But again, recognizing that in order to then get market acceptance and move this forward, I'll reiterate what I said earlier, is that we absolutely need to offer assistance to everyone. That level of assistance may differ depending on the customers, but we have to offer assistance to help everyone comply with those regulations. And I think that's where we might see this major shift in how to try to get people to comply with those requirements. And it is this like sort of policy mix, and it's going to change by jurisdiction, but a combination of the clean heat standards or clean fuel standards and clean heat acts, the building performance standards, building codes that are enhanced. We see now tiered or stepped codes as well. So I think it's a combination of those plus assistance for all is going to be really, really necessary going forward.
Perfect. I might have another question for Jerry. So the person here is wondering if you could talk a bit more about Énergir's plan in the decarbonization that don't touch to RNG. Like, does Énergir have other plans than simply not, I don't want to say simply, but that decarbonizing the gas supply?
Of course, we have, so if we're looking at what we're going to do in the distribution of energy of our current clientele, and of course we have a yearly climate report that we launch. It does detail our path to net zero by 2050 of all our activities, and net 40 for the building sector. It is going to be revealed next week, so it's something people could read about if they want more details. But if we're looking at how we're going to decarbonize our clientele, we see really 4 paths. Of course, we talked about energy efficiency, dual energy, but we also see green energy and carbon capture playing a role in helping us to reach 100% net zero by 2050. So those are 2 other elements. Of course, there's a lot of development that needs to happen in those different areas in order to really see what the portion of the decarbonation those 2 solutions will take. But we're also looking at geothermal. So we really are interested and invested in looking at how we can play our part and use the expertise that we have in the distribution of natural gas, but apply it to geothermal and see if we can start up that sector that has been a little bit slow to start in Quebec. And we also looking at whatever district networks that can be put in place, valorizing maybe industrial usage and waste of heat that can be reused into heating different networks. So these are really the other vectors that we're looking at in order to play a part into the transition in Quebec.
Great, thank you. I think we are at time, so I'll just leave the last words for Tommy. Let me share my screen. There you go.
Hi. Thanks, William. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks everybody for joining us. We're just coming up to 1 p.m. and we wanted to respect everybody's schedules, and I wanted to thank definitely William and Lauren, but most importantly, thank JP and Jerry for joining us today and for sharing their insights on all the really interesting and great work that Hydro-Québec and Énergir are doing. Thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate your time, and we hope that you found it insightful and valuable. Please join us on February 27th for our next webinar, the next 20 in energy. We're going to have some great speakers and some great guests as well. So looking forward to seeing you there. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us, info@dunsky.com. And that's it. We hope everybody has a great day. Thanks again. Bye-bye.